Let's talk about tipping. When should you tip your massage therapist? How much should you tip? Are you supposed to tip at all? Let's talk about it. I'm Catherine Nelson, owner of Del Sol Community Wellness. Thanks for joining me. Okay, so these questions around gratuity are pretty common, and it's the kind of stuff we're usually uncomfortable to ask about, so we just don't. And then since we didn't ask, we wonder about it, or we don't tip, or we over tip, or we just make it all weird and even more uncomfortable. So let's start with the first question. Should you even tip your massage therapist? The answer is yes. Tipping is still customary for massage therapists. Just like waiters, bartenders, hairstylists, food delivery folks, their wages depend heavily on tips. The caveat is when the therapist is the owner of the business. I get this a lot since I own my own business, and this is where most people are confused with private practice therapists. So we'll touch on this very quickly, and then I'll share how I leave this with my own patients. Okay, it is typical not to tip the owner of the business. That's a long-standing etiquette thing that's true not just in the massage industry, and it does cause a lot of confusion for people buying services from a private practice therapist. This has changed, or at least been challenged in recent years, because today, literally everywhere you go, there's a tip jar on the counter. Everyone and their brother is asking inappropriately for tips, which leaves everyone confused about who they should actually be tipping. So if your massage therapist is in private practice and you're paying him or her directly, remember this: just because he's charging you $60 an hour does not mean he's taking home $60 an hour. This is used as justification for not leaving a tip, and it is faulty logic. Don't fall into that trap. Most private practice therapists have a tipping policy, especially if the policy is no tips accepted. So check their website. A no tip policy is usually posted somewhere. If there's nothing posted, you can safely assume the therapist does accept tips. In general, tips for private practice therapists average a bit lower, maybe $5 to $10 per session. The tip amount can also reasonably vary depending on how often you're coming in, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So very briefly, here's how I leave this with my patients in my clinic that I see personally. I have absolutely no expectation of a tip. I believe tipping is personal and none of my business. I honestly don't think the massage therapist should have any say in how much the client, the patient, chooses to leave. For my patients, if they want the opportunity to leave a tip for any reason, they're welcome to do so. If they would prefer not, that's also fine. So what about when the therapist is working somewhere else and doesn't own the practice? Okay, in that instance, tipping is expected. It's not required, but the therapist is working for tips. This is also true for therapists who work for me in my clinic. When employers like myself are calculating wages, we're factoring tips into our offers. So it is important to tip your massage therapist if the therapist is working for someone else. Okay, so given all of that, how much should you tip? This question always comes up in my Financial Peace University classes too. In FPU, people are making a plan for their money, usually for the first time, and they're focused on hitting certain goals like getting out of debt or college savings or retirement or whatever it is, and so they start thinking about how to curb spending, where to cut, what to cut out, where to cut back. So this question of tipping almost always comes up, and their thinking is, since they're on a budget now, they should just tip the very minimum and save their money. And of course, that's way easier to do if the service or the experience is bad. Here's what I tell them, and here's what I'm going to tell you. Tipping is a reflection of you. It is in no way a reflection of the recipient. So I remember someone telling me that a long time ago, and I remember thinking, that's not true. That's not true. What about the service? What about the experience? Then, sometime later, I was in a restaurant. It was one of those places where you order and wait and they call your name. One of those places where there's a tip jar on the counter, and there shouldn't be because those employees are making well above a tip-based wage. Okay, anyway, it was busy. and there were a lot of people waiting, and it quickly became clear that they'd been waiting for a while. So everyone was antsy and agitated, and as I moved over to wait with everyone else, I began to hear the conversations going on around me. They were all talking about how long the wait is and how bad the service is and where the breakdowns are, and about someone who saw one of the cooks in the back on his phone instead of cooking, and so there's only one guy cooking back there. All the focus was on the experience and the service. Then they call someone's name, and the guy goes up and gets his food. As he's leaving, he stops by the tip jar and takes his money back out. He says, "Worst service of my life," and leaves. Just like that. No one's talking about the service anymore, or how poorly trained the kids were that were working there, or how there's only one guy doing any cooking because the other guy's doing who knows what on his phone. Now everyone is talking about what kind of guy takes his tip out of the tip jar. They're speculating about what type of man he is. So the spotlight was on the service, which was really, really bad. And then just like that, the spotlight was on that guy who thought his tip should reflect how he felt about the service he received. The tip you leave is a reflection on you. It is not a reflection on the recipient. If you plan to get a massage, budget in a tip for your massage therapist. Depending on where you are in the country, here are some guidelines. Please keep in mind you should always tip on the full price of the service, even if you're not paying full price at that appointment. You might have a Groupon or a coupon or some special offer, and you're going to pay a lesser price, or maybe the therapist or the clinic offers discounts for your profession or some other affiliation, and you're going to pay a discounted price. You should always tip on the regular full price of the service you receive. In general, in my area here in northern Colorado, it would be pretty standard to tip between $15 and $20 for a 60-minute service and $20 to $30 for a 90-minute service. If you're getting a 2-hour service, you should plan to tip between $40 and $50 because you're tying up 2 hours of that therapist's time. Remember, she gets paid the same base wage whether she sees one person in 2 hours or 2 people. The only difference is the tip, so make it well worth her time. If you feel like you can't afford to tip this much, you need to consider where you're going for your massage services. Is it a corporate place or is it a private practice? There are clinics like mine that offer affordable services and make it easier to tip. There are also practices out there that have no tip policies. But if you're going to a corporate place, a Massage Envy, a Spavia, Hand and Stone, Elements, any corporate place like that, you need to plan to tip your therapist. Now, one more thing to take into consideration is how often you're coming in for services. If you're in treatment maybe and you're coming in weekly for a period of time very frequently, it would be reasonable to tip less each time. Conversely, if you're visiting your therapist only once a month or so, a larger tip would be advisable. If you feel like the service or experience was bad, there are other, more appropriate ways to express that than to leave no tip or to tip poorly. Always remember, I've said this 1,000 times and I'll keep saying it, not every therapist is a fit for every patient. That doesn't make the therapist a bad therapist. It just means that therapist is not a fit for you. And how would you know that before getting on his or her table? Remember, your tip is a reflection of you, not the therapist. Okay, hopefully that clarifies when to tip and how much to tip your therapist. If you found this information helpful, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And then share this video with others who could benefit from the information. If you have questions, get in touch. As always, you can leave a comment or email me directly at Catherine@DelSolCommunityWellness.com. That's Catherine with a C. I do read and respond to all those emails. Okay, until next time, take care and tip your therapist.